So 3 years ago, oh my God, where does time go? I made a video comparing two conductors conducting the same piece of music to show you where the differences are, and secretly to make a point that conductors do make a difference. I was thinking about making a sequel to that video, and then I started wondering how much of a difference there would be between two recordings of the same music by the same conductor. So I searched the interweb and I found two recordings of Beethoven Symphony No. 3, both conducted by Jansons. And so I figured let's have a look and see whether it's similar or whether he changed his mind over time. If you're new here, my name is Anna and I'm an orchestra conductor, and let's just jump straight to it. So I decided to only focus on the second movement of the symphony because otherwise this video would be 3 hours long. And right from the get-go, we have our first big difference. The movement is written in a time signature of 2/4. This means 2 beats in a bar, and so you would logically conclude that a conductor would pick the pattern of 2 in a bar to conduct this. And this is exactly what older Jansons does for most of it. But this is not what younger Jansons does, and let me explain why. If I pretend that I'd be conducting this in 2, this is what that would look like. I would just go 1, 2, and so on and so forth. But I could also focus on the internal subdivisions of each one of this. So that would be like the 1 and 2 and. And if I also would choose to physically show those internal subdivisions, that would kind of look something like this: 1 and 2 and 1 and so on and so forth. And I can choose to organize that how I just did, keeping the overall sort of 2 pattern alive, or I could take what is essentially 4 beats and organize them in a 4x4 pattern, which would look like 1 and 2 and 1. Long story short, this is what you will see that young Jansons does. And you're probably wondering, based on what does one make this decision to conduct in one pattern or the other? And one of the reasons can be when the tempo is rather on the slow side. Because what ends up happening is there is a lot of time and distance between each beat, and so you don't have that much maneuvering possibilities to show the information of what happens within each beat. And this is exactly what happens with our two versions of our two Jansons, which leads me to our second big difference, which is the tempo, the speed. Let's see first what Beethoven wanted, and it's important to know that he writes funeral march. So this should have a sense of the walking pace of a funeral procession. And the other information that Beethoven writes is a metronome marking that says 8 note or quaver equals 80. Now, this little thing he wrote is controversial for 2 reasons. First of all, a lot of people thought and still think that Beethoven's metronome was broken. I am not going to get into this because then this video would last 6 hours, but that means that for a long time, the markings that Beethoven wrote were completely discarded. But the other controversial information is that Beethoven wrote this marking, this number, for the 8th note, which makes you think, why? If he wrote this music in 2/4, meaning he was thinking that the beat for the pulse was the quarter note, why did he give an indication for the 8th note? Why didn't he just write quarter note or crotchet equals 40? And this is one hint of why some conductors like young Marius conduct this showing the 8th note, because if Beethoven wrote the metronome marking for the 8th note, then why not conduct showing that as the sort of walking pace? And so after seeing what Beethoven wrote on the page, let's see what our two Jansons did. The younger Marius is more on the side of the metronome was broken school and chooses a slower tempo, while older Jansons tries to respect more the metronome marking that is written and so chooses a faster tempo. And I think the passage where you can see this tempo differences the clearest is during this sort of B theme, this major section. So I will play it side by side and you will see the different tempos. And so until now, we have two very kind of clear and objective differences, the tempo and the conducting pattern. But we can also look for more subtle differences that individually might seem insignificant, but when you pile them up, at the end, that's what makes for a version. Take, for example, this transition moment, this sort of bridge between our tragic theme A and our more happier theme B. In these couple of bars, we can see that Beethoven wrote a lot of expressive and dynamic information like forte, loud, and then a sudden piano, soft. And older Jansons takes all this information, puts it in the music, but within the frame of the ongoing pace. He doesn't let this expressiveness, this dynamic information affect the walking beat that he has established. But younger Maris Jansons sort of wants to extract as much expressiveness and intentions and emphasis of this as possible. And so he has the players play every note with a lot of weight and mostly with a lot of time. And we have a similar example of this at the end of the first theme, the tragic themes presentation, where we will see that older Maris just keeps the beat going. He really has this image for the whole movement of this walking funeral march. And so he finishes the theme with a lot of simplicity and not messing with the tempo at all. But younger Jansons, you will see that he sort of leans for a moment towards the first violins because he wants to add an extra sort of accent to kind of draw out more expressiveness out of it. And so until now, we have sort of pinned down objective elements that are either quite obvious and quantifiable, or ones that are more subtle and, details here and there. But I think there's something else that we can talk about that is also important, and for which I'm going to cheat and bring into the discussion a third recording that I found from an even younger young Maris Jansons. And it's quite remarkable because if we look at the pattern he beats and the tempo he chooses, it is very in line with our young Maris Jansons version that we have been using thus far. But what I want to show you with this third recording, and it was just a moment that wasn't shown in the others, is something that I want to talk about that is sort of the pathos of a piece, the main emotion that a piece transmits, and how this can change through different interpretations, even by the same person. And I'm just going to show you both young, super young Jansons and old Jansons, one after the other, and let's talk about it after. So what I'm going to say now is obviously very subjective and also kind of hard to describe in words. But to me, these are two very different approaches. Super young Jansons has this type of gesturing in this moment that is just very assertive, looks almost triumphant, and quite in control when put in front of this sort of majestic sound. If there were a character, that the character is in control, that this is emanating from the character, this triumphant sort of majestic moment. Whereas old Jansons has more of a sense of being almost overwhelmed or engulfed by this majestic music, by this emotion. He seems to sort of surrender in the face of it. If it was a character, we don't see it so much in control, but mostly just being either in awe or overwhelmed. And if you are a musician, you have this music in front of you and you see both those types of gesturing, types of emoting, the way you approach the music is very different. So to wrap this up, is there a difference? For me, this is a very clear yes. And I even have more proof of this because I found a fourth recording by an even older Jansons. And clearly through time, he changed his perspective of the piece because this older Jansons has the same criteria of our old Jansons. He conducts into in a much faster pace and keeping the same pathos. So to me, this shows that specific to this movement, with time, Jansons sort of changed his mind or approached it from a different perspective. And also as one changes as a person, the way that you stand in front of the same things is different. So I hope that wasn't too nerdy and that was interesting and clear enough. Please do let me know. Now, obviously, I picked the movement that I thought had the most differences, but for the other movements, I will say he does keep a more sort of consistent approach through the years. And obviously, also, this is what I can tell from what I kind of see in the videos. Of course, maybe there are recording issues that, lead me to think things that Jansons wasn't thinking, but I'm still hoping that this is kind of, interesting and at least opens questions about what interpretation is about and what conducting is about. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know, and I will see you next time.